This, this is a story called Stories of the Holocaust Part 1. During World War II, which started in 1939 and ended in 1945, approximately 6 million Jews were killed. Some people were killed just because they were Jewish, others were killed because they were mentally ill or physically disabled. Some were killed because they were gypsies and Jehovah's Witnesses or homosexuals. I'm so glad I wasn't born during the war, because although I'm not Jewish, I am mentally ill, and I too probably would have been killed. I know that during the war my dad was evacuated as a child, but thankfully he wasn't harmed in any way. I'm so glad for this because it gave me and my siblings the greatest pleasure to know him. My granddad on my mum's side fought in the war and survived long enough to see all his kids and grandkids grow up. Here are some stories people have shared in books. Eric Hirsch, A Detail of History, a Toshno Camp of Death. Hope was all we had. We all waited at the train station until it was dark, and then all of a sudden a passenger train stopped and the German police told us to make our way to the carriages at the back, which had been reserved for us. We moved along really quickly and the weight of my heavy suitcase made me pant. I climbed into the last wagon and after a few minutes the engine whistled and the locomotive belched, and then the train started to move. The train got faster and faster, but the journey was very tedious, and no matter how hard I tried to sleep, I couldn't. Throughout the night, all I could think about was my family. I just kept hoping and praying that my father and brother wouldn't be caught and sent to another camp. I was really worried about what was going to happen to us in the camp we were going to. We travelled for quite a few hours before the train started to slow down and eventually stopped. When I looked out of the window on my left, I could see a tiny brick-built station. There was a sign painted in black with a white background saying Toshno. I could see that there were a lot of barracks in front of me. There were no trees and the whole area was surrounded by a barbed wire fence. There were men in black uniforms and lots of people just wandering around. I realised that we had finally reached our destination. After about 10 minutes, a man who was wearing civilian clothes told us to step off the train and to stand in rows to be counted. After a few minutes, an elderly man appeared. The man was in his 60s and wasn't very tall. All of a sudden, the man began to speak to us in German and we couldn't believe what we were hearing. He said, "Which of you older men and boys would like to go back to your hometown? Take 2 steps forward if you want to go back." I was one of the first to step forward, and not long after, some more boys and older men also stepped forward. We were told by the Germans to put our suitcases to one side and to wait. Then the older man ordered the rest of the other group to leave their suitcases at the train station to march to the camp, which was 200 metres away. We didn't realise at first that when we took these 2 steps forward, we had actually signed our death warrants. It turned out that the older man was the camp commandant. We stood on the railway platform and watched as the others marched towards the camp. All of a sudden, the guards wearing black uniforms started to scream at the column and began to hit people with their whips. Then they tried to make them run onto a board which was no more than 2 feet wide that had been placed on the ground, which was extremely muddy and was full of clay. The men at the back of the column panicked and tried to run forward out of the way as the guards started to beat some of the older men. As a result, the men in the middle fell off the boards, and they were then at the mercy of the guards. As the situation got worse, people started to sink into the mud. resulting in complete chaos. People were terrified, and it was terrible to hear them screaming, and it was absolute pandemonium. It was like we were all having a terrifying nightmare, as no one ever even suspected that they would be treated this way. When it was our turn, we walked forward and the guards did the same thing to us. I was kicked and beaten, and I knew no matter what happened I had to stay on the board and not to fall into the mud. I knew that if I did fall into the mud I would then be at the mercy of these horrible guards, and then I would be lost. After surviving this terrifying ordeal, the guards took us to a barrack, which was a different one to the men who had been selected for work. The barrack was empty with no chairs or seats and only loose straw for us to sleep on. Despite the way the guards had treated us, we still thought we were going to be sent home. Throughout the night I was in a great deal of pain from being kicked and beaten. The guards didn't care where they kicked you, and I was left with a lot of whip marks on my body. There was one foreman whose name was Rudy that was extremely brutal. I remember him having blonde hair. He was around medium height and he wore glasses. Prisoners were killed by him, hacking them to death with a spade. He really was one of the worst barbarians in the camp. Harry Kirsch, A Detail of History, The Lonely Road to Lords, Separation at Charades. There was a Polish boy called Stasik who was one of my family's men, Jewish friends, and who we had always done business with. Throughout our time in the Charades ghetto, he was able to get us some supplies like poultry and foodstuff. The ghetto was open and not fenced in. It was still a really hard thing to do because the Jewish police guarded the ghetto very closely, and they stood at certain vantage points. The Jewish police only wore special caps and they didn't have guns. However, the German police officers were always very close by. I constantly kept going in and out of the ghetto in a way that an adult wouldn't have been able to do. Because I was a small boy, no one really took any notice of me. When I did get out, I went and bought some provisions from the peasants. At around 5 o'clock in the morning, we were all woken up by someone knocking loudly on the door. That sort of thing happening so early on the morning filled us with dread. We were absolutely certain that the Germans had come to take me and Tovia away again. My mother put a light on and asked who was there. She then pulled back the hatch and looked outside. Much to our surprise, Stasik was there, and when he came into the house he told us that he had come to warn us. Someone he trusted had told him that all of the ghetto inhabitants were going to be liquidated that day. He told us to run away and said that if we went straight away, we might still have time to escape. My mother said thank you to Stasik for the information he had given us, and we all said goodbye to him. He had obviously taken a massive risk in attempting to save our lives. However, despite the warning we'd received, it wasn't easy for us to escape because there was nowhere that we could go. My mother thought it was best for us to stay where we were and take our chance. She thought that if the worst came to the worst, at least we would be with the rest of the Shiraz Jews. We thought if it was right what the Sikh had said, that the worst that could happen would be that we would all be taken to a work camp. During this time, my mother didn't think that this fate would be too bad for us. This is because my father was in a camp near Poznan and he was still alive. I too had been in the camp, but I was sent home. I didn't want to alarm my mother, so I didn't say anything to her, but my mind kept wandering back to a tosh no, and what I had seen there. We said thank you to Stasik again, and then for the last time we said goodbye to him. It was 8 o'clock in the morning, and every one of us had to go to the April Platz open ground, which was near an unfinished goal and just a 5-minute walk away from our house. We only took with us the few belongings that we could carry. Every one of the Jews from Shiraz were gathered on this open ground. There was row after row of us, and we were all counted by the German police. At that time I was only 13, but by this age I had learned to think for myself. I knew that I had to always be one step ahead, and that I must always watch and wait. I knew that the Germans would only spare those that were useful and were fit for work. I wasn't big enough to be chosen for work, but it gave me comfort, knowing that my brother Tovia, who was 17 then, and my sister Itka, who was 18, were both old enough and tall enough to be chosen for work. I was a little bit worried about Tovia because he had a stiff knee from a football accident when he was 10 years old. His knee didn't seem to bother him all that much, and it wouldn't stop him from working either. My mother was still quite young and healthy at the age of 39. I thought she would be chosen for work. Having these thoughts made me feel relieved, although it seemed that out of all my family, I was the only one at risk. Shiraz was only a small town, and most of the men had been taken away and sent to work in camps. There were only a small population of around 1,400 Jews left, who had all crushed into the cloister church, barely able to move or breathe. As I went through the big gates, I only had thoughts of survival. When I spotted a German policeman I had once worked for, standing on guard, I smiled at him and tried to speak to him. He didn't smile back at me or speak to me, he just ignored me. I couldn't think why until I saw a group of SS standing next to him. They all had telltale insignia on their collars and hats, which was a skull with crossbones. After spending a very long hour in a church, we were all told to go outside. When we went outside, two SS officers asked people what their trade was. I knew that the only people that would survive were the ones that were selected for work. Knowing this, I responded straight away and said Schneider, which meant tailor. The officers knew I was lying, and they told me to go along with my family. I thought to myself that whatever happens next, at least we will all still be together. This thought gave me happiness. When I looked over to the opposite side of the courtyard, I could see that there was about 150 people that were told to stand at the front of the church square. The rest of us were told to go back inside the church. When I thought that my mother and brother and sister would be selected, I was wrong. However, I was right in thinking that I wouldn't be selected. The 150 might be the ones who were lucky enough to survive. In the church there was complete silence, but my mother looked at the three of us and she said, "Thank God we are all together." None of my family, including aunts, uncles and cousins, were selected. We were in the church. After we had been in the church for a while, I became very thirsty and I asked my mother if she had something for me to drink from. I told her I would go and ask the guard for some water, and she gave me a metal pan from our possessions. Just as I was approaching the gate, I noticed there was some kind of commotion. I could hear one of the SS officers shouting out to people and asking them what their trade was. As I went up with the pan, the officer shouted at me, asking, "What are you?" I automatically answered, "Schneider." The response this time was completely different, and he shouted the word, "Rose, out." I did as I was asked, and I was told to join a group of 150 people who were all stood just on the outside of the square. I was totally shocked with horror and disbelief because of what I had done. The question from the SS man completely took me by surprise. Even though I was 13 years old, I was very small for my age. I didn't know one stitch from another because I had never even held a needle in my hand. As I was walking towards the workers that had been selected, I thought that if I looked back through the gate, I would be able to at least catch a glimpse of my beautiful mother and my brother and sister. As I was walking, the tears just came pouring out of my eyes. I had never been filled with such sadness. I still held the pen in my hand that my mother had given me. Everyone that had been selected was marched off to a police station. We were kept there overnight and there was 3 people to a cell. There was no beds or mattresses. There were only a bucket for us to urinate in, and the conditions were cramped and uncomfortable. No one knew where they were going to take us from there, because we were in too good a physical condition for them to dispose of us. I was certain that we would be taken somewhere where there was work. I wondered what had happened to my family, and I sat on the floor of my cell and wept bitterly. I wished I'd have stayed with them, and my longing for them was intense. Other people did their best to calm me down, and one man kept saying, "Don't worry." Other people kept trying to assure me by telling me that my family had just been taken to another camp. I thought the night was never going to end until I heard the noise of cell doors being opened. Everyone was made to put all of their money and jewellery on the table outside the cell. We were told that we wouldn't need such things where we were going. Everyone emptied their pockets. I kept the 6 photographs I had of my family and the metal pan I used to fetch water. We all marched to the railway station from the police station. The only food we were each given was a loaf of brown bread, which had to last us throughout the whole journey. When we got on the train, which was bound for Lords, it took 5 hours to get there because the train stopped on a regular basis. Once we got to Lords, they kept us all in the wagons overnight. The following morning, every one of us was taken to the Lord's ghetto, which was all fenced in. At the gates there were some Jewish policemen, and outside the gates there were some German policemen. Everyone I could see in the ghetto was really thin and undernourished. Every one of us that had just arrived there from Shiraz was taken to some large blocks of flats, and there was around 10 people in each room. At first I didn't sleep at all because all I could think about was my mother, Tovia and Itka. I also thought about my father, who was in a camp in Poznan, and I thought about my other relatives too. I was worried about what had happened to them. Throughout the following day I walked about, dazed and shaken. I didn't know what to do or who to talk to. Everyone I had come in with seemed to be in a similar state. Every day as each transport arrived, I watched from the provinces and I longingly searched for someone from my family. Every day I hoped that another batch of people would be brought in from Shiraz, but it never happened. Other people told me that a decision had been made in Shiraz that the number of people chosen to work would be increased by 30. The fact that I had been thirsty and had gone to the church gate to ask for water and said the word Schneider meant that I was one of those 30 people and had enabled me to survive. I continued to look for my family and I kept telling myself that they must be alive. I was to soon discover that all the people who had been left in the church, including my mother, sister and brother, had all been taken to Chalmor extermination camp and murdered. I sat on the floor of the room we were put in and cried and cried. All I could do was ask myself why I was chosen for this. I couldn't see myself as chosen to survive. I just thought that I was chosen to exist alone with no one in the world to care about me. I did my best to stay as close as I possibly could to the other people from charades who I'd come to Lords with, but I soon realised that they had their own problems to worry about. They too were desperately trying to find out what had happened to their own relatives, and all of us was weak with hunger and dejection. Nobody knew what the next day would bring except from no comfort and not much food. Every one of us in the ghetto was starving. On the 18th of April 1942, every child aged over 13 was ordered to report for medicals to determine their fitness for work. On the 20th of July 1942, the eldest of the Lord's Ghetto, Chaim Rumkowski, ordered that every child over 10 years of age must report for work. On the 1st of September 1942, the Jewish police helped to clear most of hospitals of their patients. Early that morning, all the entrances to the hospitals were blocked by the SS, who drove up with lorries and in a short period of time had taken most of the patients away. However, during the confusion, many of them managed to escape, but there were mothers trying to save their children that were grabbed by the SS and taken in their place. They were all taken to one destination and for one purpose only, to be murdered. Many of them were shot on the spot. There was also 2,000 patients that were disposed of in this way. Although he had none of his own, Chaim Rumkowski, the leader of the Lord's Ghetto, loved children. Before the war, he was in charge of an orphanage in Lords. Because this man was so powerful, everyone had to obey him. There was a few hundred Jewish policemen who were under his control and helping to enforce his orders. Because of him, around 10,000 children were found work. All of those who were over the age of 17 were classed as adults. All the children that were aged between 10 and 17 worked short hours, but despite this, the work was exhausting and we had very little energy because we didn't have very much food. Not long after this, the foremans ordered that between 18 and 20,000 Jews were wanted for resettlement, and they put notices up in the streets. However, we weren't fooled by this, as by now we were fully aware that resettlement was simply another word for death. It was stated by the Germans that they wanted people between the 5th and the 12th of September 1942. The numbers were to be made up of every child under the age of 10, all the old people and the unemployed. At this point in time, I didn't work because I hadn't been in the ghetto for very long and I hadn't yet been allocated a job. I kept hearing whispers about resettlement in the street, so I decided it was best for me to play it safe. Because I didn't know the surroundings of where I was staying, I decided I would have to look around and get to know the terrain as it was. Out in the yard there was a high wall at the back of the flat which was surrounding a cemetery. I took a gamble that if Germans did house-to-house searches, they probably wouldn't go into the cemetery at the same time. Thankfully, my gamble paid off. The following day I could hear shooting from several blocks away. I could also hear people screaming as the soldiers got closer to our flats. At that point in time, I decided that I would make my move. I found a part of the wall that I could climb and I decided to climb it there and then. When I jumped down off the wall, I twisted my ankle as I landed on a stone. By this time I was shaking with fear and I was immune to the pain. I managed to drag myself towards a tombstone to hide, and I prayed to God to help and save me and to not let me be sent for resettlement. I limped from one gravestone to another, trying to get myself further away from the wall. I could hear noises, so I laid on the ground and desperately pleaded to God for me not to get caught. The cemetery was on Ribner Street in Uinka, Ribner, where the Halls Galantini wood factory was. I was paralysed with fear and I just stayed where I was. Once the shooting had eventually subsided, I heard the screams of the children and their mothers. I waited for the noise to calm down and then I came out of my hiding place. I was right about the cemetery being a safe place to hide. As I tried to walk normally, I kept telling myself that at least I could now breathe again, thank God. When I got back to my room and laid down, I was told by the other people that they had given up on me because they thought I'd been taken away. I stayed at the flats for a few days. The day I went out, I was still limping because of my ankle injury, but I managed to walk towards the square, which was next to Bleecker Ribner. I could see that there was 10 men in the square hanging from the gallows. They were left there by the Germans for 2 days for everyone to see. Life in the ghetto became harder. Every day was getting hungrier and hungrier because there was hardly any food. Bit by bit, I was losing all hope. There were times when I would look out through the fence that was all round the ghetto. I'd see people walking through the streets and travelling on trams. I often wondered why it was okay for them to be free when we were fenced in. Every single one was sick from the effects of starvation. One day, when I was standing at the fence, I suddenly felt this great despair grab hold of me. Then I just sat down on the street corner and then broke down and cried. As I sat there crying, I suddenly felt someone put their hand on my shoulder. When I looked up, a woman was standing over me. She asked me why I was crying. I told her about being selected at the gates and having to come to the ghetto alone because I had no parents or family. She took me to live with her and her 14-year-old daughter, Sala. Finally, I felt a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt for a very long time. The end. Thank you.